Good morning, everyone. I want to invite you to our time of worship right now. Would you please stand and lift up a song of praise to our King of Kings this morning? We're going to sing a brand new song called Yes, I Will. And it's this beautiful declaration over our lives that no matter what storm, no matter what social injustice, no matter what pandemic or next thing we may face, that God still reigns above it all and that he is still the king over all of our lives. So I pray that this morning that you would lift this song up with me and that it would encourage your heart. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh, yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh, yes, I will. Yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh, yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh, yes, I will. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now. And no waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh, yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh, yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh, yes, I will. I count on one thing. The same God that never fails will not fail me now. You won't fail me now. And no waiting. The same God who's never late is working all things out. You're working all things out. Oh, yes, I will lift you high in the lowest valley. Yes, I will bless your name. Oh, yes, I will sing for joy when my heart is heavy all my days. Oh, yes, I will. For all
Your beckon brings the rain and drought. Your glory spins the earth around, and your whisper makes your fire fall down. There's no other name, the name that stands through the ages. There's no other name, there's no other name like yours, Jesus, like yours, Jesus. There's no other name, there's no other name like yours, Jesus, like yours, Jesus. Ooh. Your word commands the wind and waves. Your touch revives the sick and lame. Your power wakes the dead again, and your love destroys the grip of sin. Amen. No, your love destroys the grip of sin. There's no other name, there's no other name like yours, Jesus, like yours, Jesus. There's no other name, there's no other name like yours, Jesus, like yours, Jesus. There's no other name, there's no other name like yours, Jesus, like yours, Jesus. There's no other name, there's no other name like yours, Jesus, like yours, Jesus. Every knee will bow and every tongue confess the name of Jesus. Every knee will bow and every tongue confess the name of Jesus. Oh, every knee will bow and every tongue confess the name of Jesus. Oh, every knee will bow and every tongue confess the name of Jesus.
There is none like you. No one else can touch my heart like you do. I could search for all eternity long and find there is none like you. There is none like you. No one else can touch my heart like you do. I could search for all eternity long and find there is none like you.
I love that song, and the reminder that God's word, his touch, and his power, they transform in amazing and miraculous ways. Thank you, Jesus. It's at this point in our service we just want to pause and say thank you. Without your continued support, we simply could not do what we do. The strength and reach of this ministry, it is growing, and we know that's in huge part to your faithful generosity. If you haven't partnered with us financially, we'd like to invite you to do just that. Join us in this mission of leading people to follow Jesus. We've made it simple for you. Just go to the crossroads.church/give for more information. Finally, we just want to take a moment and recognize all of you dads out there. You wear so many different hats each and every day. You love, you support, you teach, you model, you serve, and you provide. You bring us joy and you make us laugh. Speaking of laughing, stay tuned for the finale of our Dad Jokes competition. You've seen them on YouTube all week, but who will be our champion? You'll find that out at the end of today's live stream service. Dads, thank you. We love you. And happy Father's Day.
Hey guys, and hello at home as well. Good to have you. I'm thinking this question is a bit redundant, but anybody feeling kind of overwhelmed? I mean, COVID came bursting into our lives with the speed and the force of a tsunami as 2020's first brutal attack on our lives to a point that life may never again be as we used to know it. And then a minute after the whole killer virus thing broke, our government told us that we had to go lock ourselves inside our homes or else. Couldn't go to work, couldn't go to the mall, couldn't get our hair done or cut, whatever your persuasion. And if you happened to be brave or stupid enough to go to the grocery store, you had to mask up, wear gloves, wipe your cart with disinfectant, and oh yeah, slather on a gallon of Purell. And don't forget, social distancing. And that has been our tiny little shrunken down world for 97 days now. In the early days, because we were so totally locked down, our lives were in perpetual limbo. So we were curious, a curiosity that included a daily ritual that we all began to observe called, "What is today's depressing update from Dr. Fauci?" A curiosity the media happily encouraged by providing nonstop, wall-to-wall, 24/7 hysterical coverage of Corona, nothing but Corona, starring, of course, Dr. Fauci. And all that continued until Minneapolis, and a deed so heinous captured for everybody to see that we all condemned it. A crime that also prompted violent protests in every major city in America because systemic racism. And that's when Fauci and the coronavirus that made him famous got kicked off our screens because racism is now all the rage. Do you remember that seismic shift? It's kind of like, well, if Corona doesn't get you, systemic racism will. But then protesters in Seattle took protesting to a whole nother level by actually seizing and ultimately claiming as their own a tiny little plot of land just east of the precinct building in Seattle. They christened this new territory as the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ, later to be renamed the Capitol Hill Occupied Protest, or CHOP. Not sure that was an upgrade. But ever so briefly, this protest movement quickly devolved from protesting into partying, kind of a summer of love environment, except without Bob Dylan. But then everything changed again because Atlanta. It's almost like if Corona doesn't get you or a knee on your neck, then falling asleep in a drive-thru evidently will. And failing that, of course, don't forget the utter collapse of our monetary system. That'll do it, so better buy gold. I mean, no wonder we feel so overwhelmed, so out of control, so afraid. Of course, we're wondering, will life ever again be as it used to be? It's not like there's not a thing I can do to change these gathering storms. I can't, you can't either. We're all facing a series of outbreaks that feel both monumental and yet at the same time intensely personal, because our whole world is in chaos and most everybody is afraid and feeling so completely out of control. I got no clue what I ought to do. There's not a person worshiping right now who doesn't feel at least some of those emotions. And that's why we decided this summer we're going to talk about Jesus. During this raging hot and oh so very weird summer, we just thought that maybe Jesus would be a really good topic to turn to, since he is, after all, like no other. And the topic I couldn't wait to talk about as we talk about Jesus is I want to put his unlimited power on display, because his power truly is like no other. There's not a problem Jesus cannot solve, not corona, not racism, not whatever other problem you may be losing sleep over. But I'm thinking me just saying that probably doesn't convince you, so I want to take you to some verses. But rather than scratch them down real quick, you can always go back to YouTube and grab them. Instead, just take a listen. Just give yourself a cleansing breath, close your eyes, and listen. Ah, sovereign Lord, you have made the heavens and the earth by your great power and outstretched arm. Nothing is too hard for you. For nothing is impossible with God. Jesus replied, what is impossible with men is possible with God. And of course, from the Apostle Paul, I can do everything through him who gives me strength. Those straight from God verses teach us two truths we must never forget. First, the power of Christ is unlimited, and second, the provision of Christ is unconditional. The power of Jesus Christ really does know no limit. With him, there is no such thing as an impossible problem. In fact, his power is so awesome. It is offered to you and me without condition. Do you see it in the verses? Nothing is impossible. Nothing is too hard. In him I can do all things, everything. All things are possible to him who believes. Do you get the point? Nothing, everything, all things. They pose no threat to him, not even your thing, or this corona thing, the race thing, whatever other thing you may be grinding about. It ain't no thing. That thing that's been robbing you of personal peace, stealing your sleep. Yes, even in the face of that thing, Jesus is more than able. But he's also, I want you to see this, more than willing to step in and ease that pain. If you've got a Bible, digital or otherwise, Find Mark chapter 5, because I want to tell you about a young man who was as far removed from hope as any one man could be. And yet into his story came Jesus. This kid, as I affectionately call him, was living on the dead side of town, because dead is how he felt, or how he wished he felt. See, this man's sting was stinging too much. And so in his search for numbness, or maybe even nothingness, he gets stuck, desperately stuck. Because about the only time this kid didn't feel bad about himself was when he was using. We don't know a lot about this guy, which is precisely the way he wanted it. You know how some problems feel so personal and yet so monumental, you doubt that anybody can relate to what you're going through? You're not being arrogant, but life is so convoluted. The last thing you want are empty platitudes. But even if I did have somebody I could talk to, how could I ever find the words to describe the way I'm feeling? Have you ever had a problem so confounding you couldn't even explain it to yourself? You know you need something, but it's not like clearing a level on Candy Crush. This is personal, and you got no clue how to fix it, and you're getting really tired of faking it. What usually happens in a moment like that, and I'm convinced it happened here, your problem gets so gnarly, it drives you into a sort of self-imposed lockdown, leaving you removed from everybody who loves you. Because that's what unresolved problems do. They excommunicate you from others until you're all alone in this huge, supposedly protective bubble, except now you're isolated and even more desperate and without any shred of hope. That's this guy. Whatever his issue, his was a problem so convoluted that space was his only refuge. And so he imposed a social distancing on himself long before Fauci ever did. But since he couldn't afford his own place, he set up camp in, of all places, a cemetery, which kind of makes sense. He went to where he felt, and he felt dead. And so, like Job, he practiced a little bit of social distancing. He went to the place of no return. Have you ever been there? To the land of gloom and deep shadow, where even the light is like darkness. Besides, grave markers don't talk either to me or about me, meaning I can be left the heck alone. Further complicating the story is we have no clue what is up with this family, although we know he had one. I wish we were given more of this backstory, but we don't know if his parents were shocked when he left or relieved. And was he the one who bolted, or did his family give him the ultimatum? We don't know. All I can tell you is the chaos this man caused, it took a heavy toll. Maybe there were younger siblings. Maybe there was an intractable financial burden caused primarily by him. And so maybe they did. Maybe the whole family said what a lot of families say: Junior, you're our son and we love you. This is the hardest thing we've ever had to do, but you are no longer welcome here. And if you don't get some changes in your life, it's not going to work out well. His eternal battle got so bad, whatever it was, it drove him from the people who loved him and wanted the best for him. But these never-ending issues just were so draining and so exhausting that they kick him out, or he leaves, and he's in a dead place, feeling rejected and alone. I wonder if this heartache was caused by something from his past. I think that would be a good guess, even though we don't know a lot about his past. But it doesn't take a forensic pathologist to conclude that maybe his past was really painful. You won't find it just by reading the black and white of his story, but the DNA of family dysfunction, it's spattered all over Mark 5. Simply put, life wasn't working out for this kid. Got a family, but he's not connected. He once lived in a supportive community, but no more. He likely once had a promising future, but his problems had become so gnarly, every dream and every desire of his life seemed ripped away. And so he's living among the tombs. He still felt things intensely, but he's searching for numb. And so this troubled young man ends up living in a dead place. Have you ever lived in a dead place? Maybe you're living there now. Maybe on the inside you feel like a zombie, even though on the outside you still get up, get dressed, drag yourself to work. And because you're productive, you pay the bills, you show up for soccer practice, nobody notices, but you are in a dead place. You try to grin a toothy grin, but down inside, you no longer feel anything. I wonder if what happened to him is also happening to you. Maybe you're living a life disconnected from practically everybody else, so that even those who do see your pain, they can't get to you. Mark explains that this guy had an evil spirit. And Luke tells us that he had many of them, which was common in those days because God in the flesh was walking on the planet, right? And so Messiah's arrival brought a reactive and robust counter move by the evil one, which explains the kid's enormous strength. No one could bind him, Mark says. Encrypted in that is far more than just physical binding. I believe it's no one could control him in any sense of the word, not even with a chain. Not the chain of a threatened curfew or a grounding or a week without your cell rock. I mean, if God said this is as far as you can go, if Dad said that, he'd go further. And not even every parent's trump card, the risk of getting kicked out was going to bind this kid. For all those moves, they had tried them and they had failed. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. I don't know, maybe he just would sneak out. Maybe if there was a rule, he would break it. If there was a line, he would cross it. If there was an expectation, he'd ignore it because he was going to do whatever he was going to do. And no one proved strong enough to subdue him. Eventually, his behavior became so bizarre, people no longer wanted to be around him because there's no telling what this kid would do. Have you noticed there's just something about evil that empowers? I mean, this kid, he was Superman, Iron Man, and the Hulk all wrapped up inside a naked, tomb-living, desperately lonely, and hungry problem child. Given the fact there wasn't a Hampton nearby, naked guy chose to live in the tombs. Not because he had to, he chose to. He had a strange obsession with death. He preferred dark things, dark clothing, hair, music. He fantasized about corpses and zombies, the undead, sort of back from the dead. His life felt so out of control, his world this close to an apocalyptic kind of breakdown. He felt more at peace embracing death than in trying to endure life. And yet, even though his graveyard experience provided him all the freedom that he had always wanted, but no one would give it to him, with no parental intrusions, no other such banalities, what this kid discovered, it's a horrible tragedy that everybody eventually discovers, is that nobody else, not even his own dang family, they were not the source of all his problems. Can you imagine? Even with all that freedom, he's still miserable. As night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out. with a frenzied anguish, this scraggly-bearded, mangy-looking, hollow-eyed madman would scream obscenities that would make Joe Rogan blush. He'd throw wild convulsions, and it was during these manic, ear-splitting outbursts that he would also, cut himself with stones. We don't know why he started cutting, though the backstory suggests a few possibilities. Since he'd either run away from home or gotten kicked out of home, you got to believe that things back home had gotten intense. And since self-inflicted violence, as we call it these days, is an emotion-based syndrome, it's clear this kid was enduring some kind of emotional trauma. Kids these days, they burn their skin with a cigarette or a lighted match. They scrape themselves with knives, pencils, or even a tab from a soda can till they bleed. His parents tried to stop all this, but this already strong kid was getting stronger. No one could bind him, right? Not anymore. So he's stronger, and yet at the same time, he's weaker. And like most kids who cut, he couldn't explain why cutting made him feel better. But here's what he did discover, that cutting was habit forming, and even addictive. Which begs the question, why do people try to stop the pain by hurting themselves? Why? Here's how I try to explain it. Have you ever wished your life was a screenplay and you were the director of a film entitled The Story of You? Meaning, you're running all the shots, okay? Finally, you're in charge. Therefore, whenever anybody starts telling you a really boring story, all you got to say is, and cut. But I didn't get to finish. No, we got it. That's a wrap, people. That kind of control would really come in handy, especially with parents, am I right? Come in after curfew, dad says, where have you been? And cut. All right, Dad, we're going to try it again, except this time you're happy to see me. You don't care where I've been. You're just glad I'm home, and you're firing up the microwave so we can have popcorn. You get trouble at school. The vice principal is writing you up, and you say, and cut. Wouldn't it be cool to have that kind of control? Well, that's essentially what young people do when they cut. They're trying to regain a bit of power. Not the kind of power you're thinking. Most kids have strong emotions, but they can't seem to express them. And so cutting becomes an outlet. It's a cry for somebody to hear them, to understand them. It's an escape from feeling nothing. As I read this passage, I also see bipolar at play. Because one minute he's attacking and accusing, and in the very next frame, he's leaning against a gravestone, crying like a baby. He's aggressive, then depressive, and strong enough to break chains. But blink, and he's sobbing uncontrollably. And that's the problem. We have no idea why this kid is so tormented. So we go back to the cemetery. And here, this much is clear. This young man was inflicting physical pain in a failed attempt to try to ease his much deeper emotional pain. Something is eating at him. Something so destructive. It pushes him away from every healing relationship in his life. And that's what happens when you have a dirty little secret that doesn't get fixed and it won't otherwise resolve. In time, your secret alienates you to the point you unplug, so that even if you're living under the same roof, it's a disconnected life you live. And though your family still loves you, they no longer even know you. And here's the one thing I can say with confidence about this kid. He was an addict. His drug of choice may have been sharp rocks, but this is clearly an addiction. And addiction, simply defined, is the inability to stop a repeated and compulsive use of either a behavior or a substance in spite of its negative consequences. And most addictions follow a very predictable three-phase process. Addictions begin when a behavior or substance is used to find temporary relief from a terrible feeling. No matter what your addiction, the relief, the pleasure, the numbness that you feel when engaging in that activity, it's temporary. The troubles that triggered your behaviors are still there. You've just momentarily masked them. But then addiction continues as the user becomes psychologically or physically dependent on that behavior or substance. What happens is, as the relieving effects wear off and those awful feelings return, the desire to recapture the relief reinforces the addictive behavior so that your addiction persists in spite of all the negative consequences. Most addicts never intended to personally use. In fact, they actually believe they can manage their drug of choice. But here's the problem. When, can you point to that moment when someone's alcohol consumption becomes obsessive? We don't have a calculus for that. It's never our intent. We just want to relieve tension, relax, numb out a bit. We want to feel better. And it does feel better for a while. And that's why the behavior is addictive. Because the more someone uses, the more we feel the need to use. The brain starts connecting the false sense of relief to your ultimately destructive behavior, and your brain begins to crave that temporary relief whenever the tensions begin to mount again. And once that diversion becomes an obsession, it's almost impossible to stop. So that the behavior you began because you wanted to feel more in control ends up controlling you. Mark doesn't tell us, but what if the person who chained him hand and foot was the kid himself? In his more lucid moments, maybe those scars disgusted even him. And he realized, man, I don't want to keep doing this. So he tried to restrain himself until he didn't want to be restrained. What he wanted was relief, so he'd break the chains and use again. I don't know what you call that, but I call that addiction. The same kind of addiction, men, that causes you to yank the plug on your computer because you're never going to visit that site again. And yet nobody can control you, not even you. So that addictive cycle in you just takes another lap and then another and then another. To me, the most telling part of this story is this man's entire community, including his family, they knew exactly who he was, and yet nobody came to help him. My baby sister was sexually abused when she was a youngster. But it wasn't until she was an adult, actually a parent herself, that the truth came out. My sister was so upset about what our father had done to her that many other things happened that made life worse for her. But it wasn't Dad who got her sharpest attacks. It was Mom. Why? Well, because she had to know what he was doing to me. Now, whether our mom knew or didn't know, we'll never know. But I've heard that same refrain so many times. People had to know that something wasn't right, but nobody came to save me. I guess I wasn't worth saving. But what an addict can never fully appreciate is that non-involvement is often due to your family's combined sense of immobilizing guilt. I mean, as in, did I cause this? What should I have done differently? If only I had, fill in the blank, prayed more, gone to church more, read my Bible more. If only we hadn't been more busy. If only we had never divorced. These are the cries of an addict's family. And it's a trauma that immobilizes even the strongest of us. Ironically, the why won't somebody come question it's a question every addict has to face. Because for most addicts, your only hope is somebody, anybody. Why won't somebody help me? And we've got this recurring magical dream of Prince Charming. If I just drop enough hankies out of the window, he will ride by on a white stallion. He'll see my floating hanky and climb up here and rescue me. Problem is, what do you do when you send out the hankies? When you cry, or maybe you even cut or chain yourself to yourself, and yet you keep living in the stench and squalor of a dead place, and nobody comes. What do you do when the clanking of the too many wine bottles in your recycle bin never sounds an alarm that anyone follows up on? What do you do when you're barely existing in a drugged-out, hazy-headed funk, but nobody says anything? What do you do when you're coherent enough to beg God to send somebody, and yet nobody comes? That's the most painful pain this man experienced. Because he was convinced he needed to get out of that dead place, and he wanted to get out of that dead place. But the hell of his addiction was so overwhelming and so complicated and so destructive, he couldn't find his own way out, and he didn't have anybody else to help him out. They loved him, but they'd given up trying to help him. Because they'd come to understand that getting him out was just the first part of the problem. Because the problem was, once out, he couldn't stay out. You see, just getting out means you're in that same empty space that got all this garbage started in the first place, so the cycle continues, right? You start using again. Then you chain yourself to keep yourself from using again until you just got to use again. So, meaning you're stuck, numb, and desperate. Meanwhile, you've driven everybody out of your life who could help you, and you're utterly alone. That's this guy. I mean, he's alone dealing with all these devils. And he's wandering and weeping among the tombs and cutting. And though he tries to chain himself against this addiction, his resolve to change comes around less and less often. And whenever it does come, it never does stay. And so in desperate loneliness, this young man says, will I ever be normal again? Will I ever get to go home again? Is this dead place the only place for me? Meanwhile, there's another young man in this story, except he's out on the lake in a fishing boat. Now, his destination is that same cemetery, because this lake that he's boating on, it borders on the cemetery where this other guy was living, wrestling with his demons. Except that hellish addiction that he once had some control over is now his overlord. It's weird, but what gave him at least some sense of control is now in full control of him. So he's drowning in this sea of his own making. But sailing his direction is the only person on the planet who can calm raging seas. The man in the boat had told his friends, let's go to the other side. They had no clue why he was taking them there. But this man's enemy knew. And that's why almost from the moment that ship set sail, a storm broke out, a furious squall, the Bible called it, where the waves nearly broke over the boat and the boat was nearly swamped. And that's why hardly anybody except Jesus will risk coming to you when you are stuck in a dead place. Because when the demons of your addiction and fear and hopelessness, when they sense that perhaps the help of Jesus is on the way, they will do precisely what these demons did. They'll stir up the winds. They'll churn up those angry waves. Why? Because the dark side doesn't willingly give up her captives. They'd rather have a dead captive than no captive. But though angry storm clouds may cause others to turn back, Jesus was not only not alarmed, he actually slept through the whole thing. Until his crew, who were experienced fishermen, they couldn't take the pounding anymore, so they woke Jesus and said, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" So Jesus got up, rebuked the wind, and said to the waves, "Quiet, be still." Then the wind died down, and it was completely calm. And then Jesus turned to his friends and said, "Why are you so afraid?" You know why Jesus said that? Because he knew storms are rarely the lead story. No, a raging storm or a killer virus or a societal cancer, that storm is the signal that God sends to you to let you know, hang on, something cool's about to happen, something so cool that if you'll just stand against the wind and brace yourself against the waves, if you'll just hang in there and keep rowing in the direction of those people God has called you to save, it won't be long, baby. It won't be long that a whole lot of somebodies are, in the name of Jesus, going to get set free. I doubt that you ever thought of it like this before, but the same storm that engulfed that lake had also crossed over onto the shore. And standing guard just off the water's edge was this graveyard. Now, you know how it is in scary movies. If a scene is set in a cemetery, two things will be true. Number one, it's going to be dark, midnight. Number two, it's going to be raining, which means our desperately addicted, half-naked friend is now soaked through by that same storm. It's not enough that he's cutting and crying. He's now running for cover, except there's not a lot of cover in a graveyard. So this kid, as the winds beat against his body and the cold rain chills him to the core, he's thinking, you got to know, he's thinking, I can't catch a break. My life stinks. And, you know, the storm was fierce. So fierce, even veteran fishermen were scared. How much more this lonely, naked man. And maybe you too. Have you ever been in weeds so deep you wondered, I don't know if I can get through this? Because as soon as one storm calms, here comes another. But has it ever occurred to you that those storms keep coming simply because Jesus is riding the path of those storms to get to wherever you are, because he's determined to deliver you? Have you ever wondered how Jesus could sleep through that storm? It's because he knew that storm was just the evil one trying to keep this kid from getting delivered. But he also knew no storm was going to keep him from delivering some lost kid. And so while everybody was pitching a fit and crouching in fear, Jesus is napping. Now maybe you identify with the guys in the boat, hanging on for dear life, afraid that maybe this storm is the one that's finally going to get you. But then you realize, while you're in mid-tantrum, I wonder if Jesus is standing up at this very moment and getting ready to say, quiet. Be still. Have you ever experienced a powerful moment like that? You're living in a dead place. Maybe you're in debt and don't see how you're going to find yourself through. Maybe you're frozen by corona fear. Maybe you're addicted. You can't imagine things getting any worse. But then storm clouds gather and here comes even more rain. So you're sitting there crying, maybe cutting, shivering. Your nose is dripping. You're huddling under a scrawny little tree that not only affords little cover, it also is bending against the wind. And with your luck, it's probably going to break and fall right on top of you. But wait. Can you hear that? I can hear it. Because it is weird. As quickly as the storm blew in, it stops. Sun breaks through. And in that quiet aftermath, you sense something. It's like it's a presence, if you will. So you look up, and it's Jesus. And that's when you finally get it. Jesus braved this storm because it's time. It's time to break these chains. It's time for Stevie to be forever set free. I believe that God sent these storms we've been facing. I really do. Whether coronavirus, violence in the streets, chaos and mayhem on every newscast, I believe that Jesus has sent these storms our way so that we will learn how to look up again. Because Jesus is here. And people, it's time. It's time for you and it's time for me. Time for all of us to break free. And I say that because what is the first thing this kid does when he sees Jesus? He ran, fell on his knees in front of him. In other words, he worshiped. Now here's the point. He didn't go home and clean up first. He didn't shake off his demons and try to hide his most recent scars. He didn't have to break out of his addiction first and then go find Jesus. He ran immediately to Jesus first, even though he had all kind of problems, even though he was an addict, even though he was mentally compromised. He had a whole laundry list of issues. Look up loser in the dictionary. That's his picture. But none of that garbage was going to stop him from worshiping at the feet of Jesus. Listen, you can never live in a dead place so long that the place where you've been living could ever keep you from being with Jesus. You can't cut yourself deeply enough. You can't drink often enough. You can't self-medicate radically enough to ever keep you from Jesus, because you are why he crosses angry lakes in the first place. And though I may not know the details of what you're going through, Jesus knows all about them. And he saved me. He sent me through the storms I've been through so that I could come here today and point out the gathering storm clouds in this chaotic world of ours and say to you, the wind and the rain are signs Jesus is on his way and his deliverance is at hand. It really is. I know some of you have been wandering among the tombs so long that you want to, but you're not sure you can believe what I just said. You know what I think? I think you need to stop trying to believe and just get up from wherever you are and run to Jesus. That's what this kid did. He just ran, and Jesus did the rest. So run already. Run to Jesus and let him deliver you, because only Jesus can. Hear me. anything less than Jesus is mere diversion. So I don't care whatever it is that you're hooked on, or maybe you feel stuck in a dead place, or maybe it's fear that has you in lockdown, with or without the government telling you to. And an icy six-pack isn't going to solve it, not a dang thing of your life, and not a sharp blade either, or a fistful of pills. These diversions will only aggravate the situation and further deepen your problem. You do not need another diversion. You need to be delivered. So run. Run. Run to Jesus. Stop sitting there feeling helpless, even though without Jesus you are helpless. But because Jesus came to wherever you are, what you don't have to be, not ever again, not for another moment, is alone. And those chains, you don't have to let the weight of those chains that bind you keep weighing you down. Please listen. Resist every temptation to just shut down. Resist it. Jesus is here. He's on his way. The prophet Ezra wanted to shut down. He felt so ashamed and so disgraced by the chains that he carried, and a sin list so high. Do you see it? It was higher than his head. His guilt reached the heavens. And Ezra said, I'm too ashamed and disgraced, my God, to lift up my face to you. Have you ever felt that ashamed? I have. To the point you can't even look at God or be around other people who love God without feeling, I don't know, slimy. Maybe that's why you've been avoiding church, because you made a promise you couldn't keep. You claimed to be strong but proved weak. You said it 1,000 times. That's it. I'm done. Never again. But then it was time and time again. And you feel helpless and ashamed. You doubt that God could ever forgive you. Not after what I did. It's a strange paradox, but the more you hide behind your shame, and the more you dissociate from other people by living your life in dead places, the longer you're going to be in chains. And yet, if you will just look up, like that kid did, you'll see Jesus. And if you'll just get up and run straight into his nail-scarred hands, he will. He will set you free. After all, that's why he's weathered the storm. He weathered the storm so he could come to deliver you, to restore you, and to heal you, to do what only Jesus can, with a power strong enough to rebuke the winds and the waves, and yet also possessing power penetrating enough to see me as I really am. And yet he loves me. He loves me. So what's the missing link? He came. I'm here. What's missing? Here's what. It's always the one thing that is missing. You must run by faith to wherever he is. You got to run to Jesus. Let's bow our heads. Here's what I pray will happen in these next moments. And this is for everyone who is worshiping. Whether you're online or here in this room, you're worshiping. If you're living in a dead place right now, I plead with you, come running. By faith, reach out to Jesus with trembling hands and a broken heart, absolutely. And yet all you have to do is ask him to forgive you, to change you, and to forever heal you. Now, maybe you're resting safely in the arms of Jesus. If you know that you are his, in a moment we're going to take the bread and the cup, and so I urge you to have those elements handy. And here's what I want us to do today. As we take the bread and the cup, would you, in a mental review, would you just take all the scars you've caused, and would you place those scars in Jesus' nail-scarred hands? Do it all over again as though it were the very first time. Run to Jesus. Look up and by faith see Jesus. And remember what he endured just so he could deliver you. Father, I ask you to break through with great power today. May your Holy Spirit rain down with fire, because we want to see Jesus. We need to see Jesus. We're so tired. But here we come. All of us, we come running into the arms of the one who came first, running to me. Please, if you're feeling trapped or in bondage, come. Only Jesus can set you free. It's only at the cross where the living God who died but now lives, only there can the living one make the dead you forever alive. So come to the cross. Come to the cross, because if you miss the cross, you miss Jesus. Please, don't miss Jesus.
Right now, we're going to continue our time of worship with communion. And I just want to encourage you guys, just take the emblems as you feel ready, as you feel led by the Spirit. We're going to jump into a last song called Overall I Know. And it talks about how God reigns above it all. And as we take this time together, I want to remind you that the Word says that when we do this, we proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. And that means that we acknowledge that there was a perfect sacrifice that had to be made for us. So I pray that our hearts would be in that place as we continue our worship this morning.
You tell mountains they must fall, and they fall. You tell oceans to be still, and they're calm. You tell sickness it must leave, and it's gone. In my weakness, God, I know you are strong. You are the one above it all. I stand in awe. You're the God over all. I know no higher name, no greater throne. You stand alone. You're the God over all. I know. Over all I know. You tell broken things be healed, and they're whole. You tell fear it has no place, it must go. You tell death it has no chance, it won't win. trust you. I believe it, I receive it, my God is over all. I believe it, I receive it, my God is over all. I believe it, I receive it, my God is over all.
Amen. Could you be seated for just one more moment?
We're thrilled that you've joined us today for worship, whether that's online or in person. In fact, we hope that you will meet us back here each and every week so that we can continue to gather together. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel and ring that little bell so that you get all the notifications for the content that we're putting out there. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, the Dad Jokes finale coming at ya. We'll see you next week.